All right, welcome everybody to part 3 of our bullying prevention podcast about mistruths and what to do about preventing bullying. I'm Dr. Greg Moody, and this is Senior Master Laura Sanborn. How are you doing, ma'am?
I'm doing great, sir. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. Well, she's a 7th degree black belt and senior master instructor. She's been teaching for decades. So she's here to be our additional speaker about bullying prevention. Let me give you a little bit of background on myself, and this is also about her. We're both again, master instructors. My background is I'm a licensed counselor, but I'm also a PhD in education. My focus was on bullying prevention. That's what my area of research is. And the research that I did for my doctoral dissertation, if I didn't mention it on the prior podcast, was the benefits of martial arts for kids regarding bullying. And what we determined in the research was, and what we'll present here in some of the subsequent podcasts, is when kids are going through a martial arts program for enough time to get their black belt, that bullying is reduced by about twice as much, more than any other school-based bullying prevention program. Bullying's reduced. So that's kind of the upshot of the summary of what we're going to talk about. But what we want to do today, regardless of whether you're doing martial arts or not, is talk about the myths that we need to overcome to really understand bullying, understanding what bullying is and what it isn't, and then what to do. So if you haven't watched the prior podcast, we recommend you watch those. Doesn't mean you won't get a lot out of that today if you're jumping in now. And what we're going to cover today is jumping ahead. We've covered what some of the effects of bullying are on kids who bully, but now we're going to cover a really interesting part of it, which is what are the effects of bullying on the kids who are doing the bullying, of the effects on the kids who are the bullies. Now, a lot of times people would think, well, who cares about those kids? Those guys are being jerks, so why do we care about them? But there's a lot of very serious effects, and we have to do something about this, not just to punish these kids, and because they're going to have some negative consequences in their life. Master Sanborn, what are your thoughts on this before we kind of jump into it?
Yeah, I was very surprised when I learned this during, during our original investigation into bullying, because I had assumed that the bullying kids had such high self-esteem already. That's why they were, just using that self-esteem and power to push around other people. So it didn't occur to me that there were negative consequences to them doing the bullying. The reason they would bully is because it felt good and they felt better because they were being bullied and they felt more powerful. So it didn't occur to me that there would be those type of negative consequences in their later life, even much less current while it's happening.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a contrasting thing. The number one thing when I ask a group about why do you think kids bully is they almost always, whether it's a group of teachers or a group of people that aren't even involved with working with kids, is almost inevitably somebody says, well, kids who bully are kids with low self-esteem. That's the common trait. And what we know is kids kids that bully are often not kids who have low self-esteem. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But if the opposite is true, is kids who bully tend to have about average or better than average self-esteem, why would this have negative consequences? Well, let me just share some of the data with you. Kids who bully are more likely to get into fights. Well, that's not a surprise, right? But these fights aren't with other kids. They would potentially be with kids that they are bullying, but they're also with other kids in school. They're getting in altercations with lots of other people. They're more likely to get injured. They're more likely to steal and vandalize properly, or vandalize property, not vandalize properly. They're more likely to drink alcohol early. They're more likely to smoke. This is as a youngster. And they're more likely to drop out of school, be truant. You don't hear that word a lot, but drop out of school. They're also more likely to have low academic achievement. So poor grades. They're more likely to also report a negative climate at school. So these kids, even though what we're going to find is the kids who bully do it for a variety of reasons, including improving their social status, they're also more likely to perceive that school is bad, that school has a negative, is a negative environment for them. They're more likely to bring a weapon to school than the average student, not than the kids who are being bullied, but than the average person. Now, here's one that will probably blow your mind. In some research that was done in 1993, so it's a little bit dated, but it still holds up in different research. It just is hard research to do, so they don't do it frequently. In research that was done in 1993, 60%, I'm going to kind of draw a block here, 60% of boys who were bullied in middle school had at least one conviction of a felony by the age of 24.
Is this ones who were bullied or ones who did bully?
These are all these statistics are about kids who bullied. Kids who bullied. They bullied other kids. So kids who bullied other kids in middle school had at least one felony conviction by the age of 24. Now, if you know anything about felonies, and I hope that not that many people do know much about felonies on this call, but if you know anything about felonies, it's pretty hard to get a felony conviction. Felonies are things like murder, assault. They have to, do some really, really bad things. I don't even want to list all the things that they have to do to be a felony. Felony doesn't mean driving too fast. Felony doesn't even mean small, minor theft, misdemeanor theft. Misdemeanors there's a whole variety of crimes that are considered misdemeanors. And very frequently when people go to court, they plead down from a felony to a misdemeanor. So convicted of a felony means it was serious enough that they didn't even get to plead down to a misdemeanor on their first conviction. 60%, more than half of kids that were in middle school and bullied other kids were convicted of a felony. Here's another statistic. 40% had 3 or more convictions by the time they were 24. They were also 4 times as likely as their peers to have multiple convictions. So if we look at this picture and kids who bully get into fights, get injured, steal, drink, smoke, they drop out of school, they have lower academic achievement, get poorer grades, there's a negative climate that they perceive at school, they are more likely to bring weapons. 60% of kids who bully in middle school are convicted of felonies, and then it gets even worse from there. Kids who bully are a group that we have to pay special attention to, partly, of course, because we want to protect the kids who are bullied, of course, but we also need to do something about this to make sure these kids don't have other problems. This is not just to protect the kids who are bullied. This is to protect the kids who are bullying. Again, we're not trying to be nice to them for the sake of protecting the kid. We're not trying to be nice to them in spite of their bad behavior. What we're trying to do is understand that this is a problem that needs to be fixed for both kids' sake. It's a problem that needs to be fixed so that both kids have positive futures. Now, who does bully? Again, common myth. Kids who bully are outcasts or loners. They have bad social skills, bad self-esteem. That's a myth. In reality, they're very rarely socially isolated. They very rarely have low self-esteem. They usually, in fact, have peers that support them. Often they're the popular kids. So in reality, they have better than average social skills. And I think for most people, when I explain this, they think back about the kids who were bullying other kids at school and go, gee, those kids were the ones that when something happened, they had a snappy comeback. They had a way to resolve situations if there were problems. They had a way, if they were in a verbal altercation, they could come up with something that was the right thing to say at the right time. So they can think that those kids also probably had better than the average, not necessarily better than average, but average or better than average self-esteem. Now, there's a special group of kids that we're going to talk about a little later that this doesn't apply to. But in general, this is the case of kids who bully. And it really isn't a single profile. This doesn't apply to everybody. There's somewhat of a bell curve around this, but we're trying to give you some ideas of some categories that you could think about here. Same thing for kids who, now to contrast this, kids who get bullied. Generally, the kids who get bullied do have, now again, this is not a hard and fast rule. They generally tend to be quiet, cautious, and they tend to be sensitive. So that would make some sense because the one who's bullying would get a reaction. They often have lower than average self-confidence or self-esteem. They tend to be physically weaker. And they also have a resistance or afraid of getting hurt. There's fear of getting hurt. There's another characteristic that we see a lot is they find it easier to associate with adults. So this amounts to kids who bully are generally ones, in a lot of cases, the teachers like. They're ones that other kids associate with. They're ones that have, as we said before, popular relationships with other peers, with teachers, could be popular with the principal, the administration of the school, or in other environments and organizations with churches and different groups that they're in. They may be really well liked. The kid who gets bullied may have trouble making friends. They may not be comfortable reaching out and having a good support group around them. They may not be as big as other kids. That's, again, none of these things are necessarily true. Sometimes kids who get bullied might also have some developmental issues. So a kid who has a developmental issue and knows he or she might be not as successful in an activity, of course they may be a little more cautious about joining in an activity or joining in with friends. So a kid who gets bullied, you can see them as sort of flip sides or mirror images of each other in a few different ways. Anything to add there, Master Sanborn?
No, sir. This was stuff that I pretty much understood pretty well.
Okay. All right. Now there's a special case of this that's a little bit of a combination of these two, and it's called the bully victims. Now these guys, they do both. They get bullied and they bully. So they do both. They are bullying other kids on a regular basis and they bully others. Now, this is about 6% of the population of kids. So we had about 14% of kids get bullied, about 19% of kids bully other kids in the previous example. In this case, about 6%. Now that's added into that total. So it's not an additional 6%, but 6%. So 6 out of 100 kids are these bully victims. And these kids kind of have the worst situation from both. Often they're actively disliked by both kids and adults. The teachers often don't like these kids because they're always having to deal with them. They're, hassling other kids, and they're complaining about getting hassled by other kids. They're getting bullied and being bullies to other kids. They're often having developmental issues potentially. As I mentioned before, they may try to bully weaker students because they're ones that they know they can pick on, but then the other kids, because they're not well liked, are going to pick on them. And then the other kids in the group like to see them getting picked on because, again, they're not well liked. Now, these kids, they have really poor outcomes from other kids. So if you imagine all the negative things that we talked about that can happen to the kids who are bullied, like higher levels of depression, higher levels of anxiety, higher levels of headaches, higher levels of physical issues, and all the other issues that happen to kids who bully, like they might have higher levels of convictions in felonies, which is the worst one to me, but also they have poor academic grades, negative climates at school, tend to be more truant, and tend to have higher levels of absenteeism and all those things. If you add all those up, you can imagine that this is a major problem for these kids in a lot of different ways. So bully victims kind of have both the worst situation from everybody, but also they're the worst liked of everybody in all these scenarios. So let's move on to what the other kids in the environment want to do. Most kids around want to do something. Why isn't bullying taken care of by teachers, and why isn't bullying also kind of self-regulated by the other kids? Why don't the other kids do anything? Do other kids not care, or do other kids actively uninterested in what's happening when a kid gets bullied? Are they interested? Do they want to help? What's going on with that? So let's talk about that a little bit. What about the other kids? And what we find is most kids want to do something, but why aren't they doing anything? So here, let me give you some stats on this. 38% of kids figure it's none of their business. So these kids, about a third of the kids don't really think they should do anything. It's none of their business. They should leave well enough alone, and they don't want to get involved. About another third, about 27%, think they should help, but they don't. Now, why don't they? We'll talk about that in a little bit. And about another third of the kids, about 35%, try to help. So if we look at this data, what we know from this data is that you can roughly think about this as about a third, a third, and a third. About a third kind of ambivalent, it's none of their business. About a third think they should help but don't, and about a third do try to help. But that means the majority of them, if you add these two up, 27% and 35%, that adds up to 62%, if I'm doing my math right. 62% of kids do think they should do something about it. 62% of the kids don't like bullying. They don't like the bullying to happen, but they're not doing anything about it. So why aren't they? Why aren't other kids doing something about what they think is a problem? Now, this, by the way, applies to adults. Everything we do in this module, and when we're talking about these things, would apply to adults too. They generally think they should do something, but they don't. Why not?
Don't know what to do.
Yeah, they don't know what to do, or maybe there's some other reasons. So let's talk about those. Okay, so why don't they help? Or why don't they think it's effective? So some of the kids that help, we'll talk about that. So here's some interesting data. 66% of the kids felt that the staff, the other people around them, and again, by the way, adult data is very similar to this, responded poorly. So if you were a kid and you helped, but 2/3 of the staff felt that 2/3 of the staff responded poorly, whatever they did, they might have blamed you for the problem, blamed the kid who got bullied for the problem. They might have not done anything about it. They may have ignored you. They may have yelled at you for bringing the problem to their attention, whatever the problem was. And again, we're not blaming teachers for this. They often aren't educated, as we talked about in the other modules. They aren't told how to identify the difference between conflict and bullying, which is they're two different things. And they don't necessarily know which tools to use in those cases. 6%, only 6% of the kids interviewed thought that the staff responded well. So imagine that. 66% of the kids thought the staff responded poorly. Only 6% thought the staff responded well. And then the difference was just an in-between. Okay, so that's one reason. Here's some other information. In another study, this was of middle school kids. This was of elementary kids, the first one. In a middle school study, they asked some 9th grade students whether or not they thought the teachers were interested in helping. So, this one, the first one I just mentioned was whether or not they responded well. The second is, do you think the kids were interested in helping? And this is what the kids said. The kids said that 35% thought the teachers were interested. They only thought 25% of the administration, the principals and the school administrators, were interested in helping. 44% didn't know. And 21% thought they were not interested. So that means about 65% of the students didn't think or didn't know whether or not the teachers were interested in helping. So think about these two statistics that we just talked about. In one case, the kids about 66% of the time, in our other 62% of the time, in our other discussion, the kids wanted to help. They either didn't do it or they did, but they wanted to help in either scenario. 62%, about 2/3. And in this case, we asked, well, why don't they help? About 2/3 of the time, they're either not sure or they're pretty sure the teachers may not be very responsive. What this means is a lot of times the kids are helping even in spite of whether or not the teachers are supporting them. And in fact, more often than not, the kids are helping when the teachers or the administration may not be supportive of them. So the conclusion that we would come to here is the kids are doing their job. Remember, let me be clear about this. 62% want to help. what did we just say there? 65% don't know if they're having support. Those are the opposite numbers. This means the teachers may not help them. This is the kids want help or want to help stop the bullying. And the 65% means that they don't know if the teachers will help them. These are the opposite statistics. These are not matching, even though the numbers are very close. So if we understand this, that means if it was 50-50, then it would mean that the kids about half the time want to help and the teachers about half the time want to support them. Maybe that matched up and maybe the kids want to help when they get support from the teachers. But this is not the case. This means that very much of the time, the kids want to help. If the kids wanted to help 100% of the time and the teachers were 0, that means the kids get 0 support from the teachers. This means a lot of the cases, the kids get very little support from the teachers, about twice as much as they would, that means only about 35% of the time they get support. That would be the equivalent statistic about how much they get support. Does that make sense? Yeah. So 62% of the time they want to help, about 35% of the time they get support. And even then, that's not going to be a one-to-one correspondence. So no wonder it's a difficult situation in schools. All right. Did you have anything to add, Master Sanborn?
So by support, kids are looking for any type of positive response to them helping?
Well, they may not. What it means is the kids aren't expecting support from their teachers or their administrators, probably.
Right, but they're looking for that. They would know what to do if they thought they were going to get help.
We don't know if they're looking for that or not. What we know is that they're not expecting it. They don't think that it's available. They don't think that there is any support available. So that's what this means, is that these are not correlated. If it was 162% of kids want to help and they all thought the teachers and administration were supporting them, why wouldn't they think that? Well, that's because they're not being told that the administration and teachers want to support them, and or when bullying happens, they don't see any evidence that they're getting support or help from the teachers or administrators. Or if they're bullying other kids themselves, which 19% of them do, then they're not getting stopped.
Right.
So if I'm bullying another kid and I don't get, if I'm bullying another kid and I don't get stopped, then I know it's okay to do. And in fact, I get benefits from that because I get more popular at school. I get higher status, because you get higher status if you bully another child and nothing happens to you. I'm in a higher power position. Now, let's also, related to this, talk about how, and for a lot of the people that are listening to this, whether you're a parent or whether we have Master Sanborn, who's a martial arts instructor, I'm a martial arts instructor, or maybe you're a teacher or an educator or somebody that works at a church that works with kids, or anybody who does work with kids. It's important to know how adults bully children. And we do this often without knowing how we might do this. So how do adults bully kids? And we all might do this unknowingly, or maybe when I tell you this, you know it, but you just didn't recognize it as bullying. Remember, what was the definition of bullying? It was 3 things: intention to hurt, repeated over time, and an imbalance of power. The imbalance of power, as an adult, you have that automatically, so we can check that off the list. You do have imbalance of power no matter what. repeated over time, there's lots of behaviors that we as adults repeat over time with kids. If you're a teacher and you have to remind a kid of something a lot. Now, intention to hurt is frequently not the case when we're working with kids. So that wouldn't be bullying, but it might be perceived, and it might be, we have to be careful about, I wouldn't consider you reminding the kid to do something and take their, if you're a parent and you're reminding your kid to take the trash out and they get upset about it, you didn't have any intention to hurt your kid's feelings that way. However, it could be perceived as that, and so therefore it might have the same emotional reaction with your kid. So we have to be a little bit careful about how we're perceived. That's one piece. It's a little bit different off topic from this, but often things can unintentionally or intentionally be like bullying, where adults bully kids. So let me give you some examples. Mean names. And sometimes adults do this just because they've been brought up that way. Like, you're crying like a baby, or, hey, that's a parent might say something to a kid, again, not meaning it. I don't hear this very much, but hey, don't be an idiot. Something like that. Kids have reported to us in research, they try to make me look stupid, make a fool out of me. Different treatment. From other students. So if one student gets singled out as not performing as well, or they look different, this is common. One of the common ways kids get bullied is maybe their clothes they wear might be different. They're not dressed as nice. And a teacher unknowingly might say something like, hey, where'd you buy your clothes? You buy your clothes at Walmart, or you buy your clothes maybe because they're ripped, or maybe because they're not fitting as good. And unknowingly or knowingly, I mean, that's kind of mean. I mean, that's kind of, that's intended to hurt somebody's feelings. And it just may be a habit that you have as an adult. And I've caught myself saying things, I don't say those kind of things, but I've caught myself maybe not critiquing somebody in the way that would be, in a way that would be as good as I could. And it can be taken this way, and it can be taken in a hurtful way. And it really is mean if I said something like that, if I was saying something about somebody's clothes that way. Sarcasm is a common way. And then embarrassing somebody. Embarrassing somebody, maybe they don't understand new material. Maybe they didn't get the math problem right. You were explaining something, and well, if you listened, you would have heard that. Anybody ever, say that in front of people? Well, that's sarcastic and embarrassing at the same time. And you wouldn't think that you're being mean, or you wouldn't normally call that bullying, but it meets the criteria, doesn't it? It's an imbalance of power because you automatically have that already because you're teaching them. It's might be repeated because you might be doing it on a consistent basis. And because that kid might be having trouble, maybe they have a hearing issue. Maybe they shouldn't be in the back of the room. Maybe there's another reason why they're not listening as well. Maybe they have other issues, like maybe they have ADHD. Maybe there's another issue that's compounding this. And it kind of is intending to hurt. I mean, if you really think about it, there might be a different approach to saying that would also get the kid paying attention and get the kid to listen. And you might feel like, well, there's no way I can get the kid to listen unless I say something like that. Okay, that is true. There may be another conversation we can have. But adults do bully kids, and we learn these skills to say these things from our parents and from other sources when we grew up, and that's pretty common. All right, let's go on to, we've got just a couple minutes more here. Master Sanborn, anything else to add?
No, a lot of the times, like you said, with the adult bullying, it's more repeated than you even realize. when you're trying to get somebody to do something and you go through several different versions of this, trying to make them do what you think they should be doing. And you're not even realizing you're bullying because it's just a constant barrage of embarrassing ways to say it, or you think you're trying to get them to do it by doing a different verbalization of it, but it turns out that you're just embarrassing the kid, or sarcasm. And I know sarcasm is a lot of times thought of as a tool for humor, but it can be overused as a tool for bullying too. So,
and one thing to think about, that's a really good point, because we say stuff in our classes when we teach, for those of us who are educators, and we also say stuff as regular people, as parents, and talking to people, and we think things are funny. Sarcasm is funny, and there's other things we say to other people that are funny, and it gets a laugh, and we think, well, it gets a laugh, so it's okay. And in general, I like a laugh. I have one of my hobbies is stand-up comedy. I do that, and I like making people laugh. But Mark Twain said the secret to humor is truth and pain. And often when people are pointing out truths, and when people are, that's not fun. And when we use sarcasm, that is painful. And I don't have a problem being upfront, and being, anybody who knows me knows that I am certainly capable of telling them the truth and letting them know when things are not working right, or they're doing something wrong, or anything is not perfect. We're not telling anybody to be overly nice to anybody, or not be assertive and confident instructor, or coddling people in any way. We really want to be everybody to be assertive and confident, and we will direct you to some of our other podcasts about that. What we have to be careful of, though, is those three criteria: repeated over time, imbalance of power, which you have a lot of power over people, and intention to hurt. And sarcasm is a hurtful way to explain something, especially when you think from a kid's point of view, they don't feel good about screwing something up in the first place. They mess something up, they're not doing something right, they're not doing the math problem right. In a martial arts case, they're not doing the kick right, they're frustrated with it. And using sarcasm wouldn't be appropriate unless we have a lot of rapport with somebody. And then maybe it's fine, and then they enjoy what we're talking about, maybe or maybe not. Now, if you're an adult teaching an adult, same thing. In fact, I found that adults enjoy that even less, but we think that I just said what I said. And when I said that, you might hear it that, yeah, that's true. But think about what I said. You might have felt like you agreed with me on that, but probably what I said is not true. Probably kids enjoy it even less, but they just take it because you have an imbalance of power with them and they can't object. There's no way for them to accept that your imbalance of power doesn't override them objecting and saying, hey, don't be talking to me that way, because they're 5 years old, and how can they complain to you as the teacher? Or they're 10 years old even, how can they really complain to you as your teacher? Well, that's all we have for today. Next time, we're going to be talking about what to do when somebody's bullying you. So that's going to be a really exciting topic. I know everybody's going to get a lot out of that, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time and our next bullying podcast. And we're going to wrap this thing up and make sure everybody's really educated on bullying, myths, truths, and what to do. Thanks a lot, Master Sanborn.
Thank you, sir.